Senator Lindsey Graham, a man of strong convictions, especially when it comes to international justice. He believes in holding the bad guys accountable, no matter where they are or what they've done. But there's a catch. His support for international justice seems to vanish when it's America's friends on the line. Suddenly, the very court he championed becomes a threat. This is the Graham paradox, one for the world and one for America's allies.
In the aftermath of unimaginable horrors, the world came together. Determined to prevent history from repeating itself, they created the International Criminal Court, or ICC. It was a bold idea, a permanent court to hold individuals accountable for the gravest crimes: genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity. No one, not even heads of state, would be above the law. But like all human endeavors, it was imperfect. Its jurisdiction was limited.
America, the land of the free, the home of the brave. A nation built on the idea that all are created equal and endowed with certain unalienable rights. But somewhere along the way, a dangerous idea took root. American exceptionalism. The belief that America is different, special, above the law. This sense of exceptionalism has seeped into America's foreign policy, particularly when it comes to the ICC. America has consistently opposed the court's efforts to investigate alleged crimes by its citizens, its allies, and even itself. It argues that the ICC is biased, that it infringes on American sovereignty, that it's a threat to national security. But critics see it differently.
Senator Lindsey Graham, a seasoned politician known for his hawkish foreign policy views, has never been one to mince words. He's a staunch supporter of the military, a vocal critic of America's enemies, and a fierce advocate for what he believes in. And when it comes to international justice, he believes in holding perpetrators of atrocities accountable. But then comes the caveat, because Graham's support for international justice seems to evaporate when it's America's allies in the crosshairs. This is the crux of the Graham paradox.
The war in Afghanistan, America's longest war, has been a breeding ground for accusations of war crimes and human rights abuses. The ICC's interest in investigating these allegations, including potential crimes committed by all sides, was met with fierce opposition from the United States. And at the forefront of this opposition was Senator Lindsey Graham. Graham argued that the ICC had no jurisdiction over American citizens, that it was biased against the U.S., and that any investigation would undermine American troops on the ground. His stance exposed the hypocrisy at the heart of America's relationship with international justice.
The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a long-standing and intractable conflict, has been another flashpoint in the debate over the ICC's role. When the ICC announced its intention to investigate potential war crimes committed by both Israelis and Palestinians, the United States once again balked. Senator Graham, a staunch supporter of Israel, condemned the ICC's decision, calling it outrageous and anti-Semitic. He argued that the ICC had no jurisdiction over Israel, which is not a member state, and that the investigation was politically motivated. His stance raised serious questions about the limits of American support for international justice. The court of last resort, a beacon of hope in a world of chaos. The world is a messy place. Conflicts erupt, innocents suffer, and all too often those responsible for the most heinous crimes walk free. It's a cycle of violence and impunity that seems impossible to break. But in the face of this despair, a flicker of hope emerged. The International Criminal Court, a court of last resort, created to hold individuals accountable for the worst crimes imaginable: genocide.
The United States, a nation that prides itself on being a champion of human rights and the rule of law, has a complicated relationship with the ICC. Despite being instrumental in its creation, the U.S. has consistently refused to join the court. It's a decision rooted in a complex web of legal, political, and ideological considerations. The U.S. government argues that the ICC's jurisdiction infringes on American sovereignty, that it could expose American citizens, particularly military personnel, to politically motivated prosecutions. This stance raises uncomfortable questions about America's commitment to international justice.
A world of unequal justice. Can the ICC truly deliver? The ICC, for all its aspirations, operates in a world of stark inequalities. Its critics argue that it disproportionately targets leaders and individuals from weaker nations, while those from powerful states often escape scrutiny. It's a valid criticism, one that highlights the challenges of achieving true justice in a world still governed by power politics. The ICC's reliance on state cooperation, particularly in arresting and surrendering suspects, makes it vulnerable to political maneuvering. Powerful nations can exert pressure, offer incentives, or simply turn a blind eye when it suits their interests. The result is a system where justice is often selective, applied more readily to the weak than to the strong.
The erosion of trust, a chipping away at global justice. The very foundation of international law rests on a delicate premise: trust. Trust that nations, regardless of their size or might, will abide by a common set of rules. Trust that individuals who commit heinous crimes will be held accountable, no matter their nationality or political affiliations. When powerful figures like Senator Lindsey Graham publicly undermine international institutions like the ICC, they chip away at this foundation. They signal to the world that international law is not a universal standard, but rather a tool to be wielded selectively.
Emboldening the autocrats. When impunity becomes the norm, the world is watching, and what they see is a dangerous precedent being set. When powerful nations exempt themselves and their allies from the scrutiny of international law, they send a clear message: impunity is an option. This message is not lost on the world's dictators and autocrats. They see a system where accountability is negotiable, where power trumps principle.
The implications of undermining international justice extend far beyond the halls of the ICC or the chambers of the US Senate. They ripple outward, impacting global norms and behaviors in profound ways. When powerful nations flout international law, it weakens the incentive for others to comply. It creates a sense of moral relativism, where everyone feels justified in bending the rules to suit their own interests. This erosion of norms can have devastating consequences. It can lead to an increase in human rights abuses, as states feel emboldened to act with impunity.
The world stands at a crossroads. The rules-based international order, painstakingly built over decades, is under threat, and the stakes couldn't be higher. If we allow international institutions like the ICC to be undermined by political expediency, we risk creating a world where might makes right, where the powerful operate with impunity, and where justice is a distant dream for the vast majority of humanity. The choice is ours. We can continue down this dangerous path, sacrificing our principles on the altar of real politics. The United States, a nation that has long projected itself as a champion of human rights and the rule of law, casts a long shadow over the ICC, despite its non-member status. Its absence, a constant source of debate and controversy, has profound implications for the court's legitimacy and effectiveness. Critics argue that America's refusal to join the ICC undermines the court's universality, weakens its deterrent effect, and sends a dangerous message that powerful nations are above the law. They point to America's history of military interventions, often in regions where the ICC is actively investigating alleged crimes, as evidence of its double standards. The US government, on the other hand, maintains that its decision to remain outside the ICC is based on principled concerns about sovereignty, due process, and the potential for politically motivated prosecutions. They argue that the US has a robust domestic legal system capable of holding its citizens accountable for any crimes committed both at home and abroad. Regardless of where one stands on this issue, one thing is clear: America's absence looms large over the ICC. Its decision to engage or disengage, to support or obstruct, can have a decisive impact on the court's fate, for better or for worse.
One of the most persistent criticisms leveled against the ICC is that it disproportionately targets leaders and individuals from weaker nations, while those from powerful states often escape scrutiny. This perception of selective justice, whether justified or not, has fueled accusations of bias and undermined the court's credibility in the eyes of many. The ICC's defenders argue that the court's track record simply reflects the realities of its jurisdiction and its dependence on state cooperation. They point out that the ICC can only investigate crimes committed in countries that are parties to the Rome Statute, or situations referred to it by the UN Security Council, where powerful states often wield veto power. However, critics counter that the ICC's focus on weaker states, even if unintentional, reinforces a dangerous narrative of international justice as a tool of the powerful, used to keep weaker nations in check while shielding themselves from accountability. They argue that this perception of bias, whether real or perceived, undermines the ICC's legitimacy and weakens its deterrent effect. The challenge for the ICC, moving forward, is to address these concerns head-on, to demonstrate that it is truly a court of last resort, capable of dispensing justice impartially, regardless of the power dynamics at play. Failure to do so risks further eroding trust in the court and undermining its ability to fulfill its mandate.
The debate over the ICC, its successes, its failures, and its future ultimately boils down to a fundamental question. What kind of world do we want to live in? Do we aspire to a world where international law is respected, where accountability is the norm, and where justice is blind to power and privilege? Or do we resign ourselves to a world where might makes right, where the powerful act with impunity, and where international institutions are merely tools to be manipulated for political gain? The ICC, for all its flaws, represents an attempt, however imperfect, to move towards a more just and equitable international order. It embodies the hope, however fragile, that we can transcend the limitations of state sovereignty and hold individuals accountable for the most heinous crimes, regardless of their nationality or political affiliations. But the ICC cannot do it alone. It requires the support, both political and financial, of states that genuinely believe in its mission. It needs to be shielded from political interference and empowered to investigate crimes wherever they occur, without fear or favor. The future of international justice, and indeed the future of humanity, may very well depend on our ability to reimagine the global order, to create a system where power is checked, where accountability is the norm, and where the pursuit of justice is a collective endeavor.
So what's the verdict? Is Senator Lindsey Graham a flip-flopper, shifting his stance on international justice to suit political wins? Or is he a shrewd strategist, navigating the complexities of a world where power often trumps principle? Frankly, the answer is less important than the larger question at stake. What kind of world do we want to build? One where international law is a cornerstone of peace and accountability, or one where it's merely a tool for the powerful to wield against the weak? Graham's stance, while perhaps a symptom of a larger malaise within American foreign policy, exposes a fundamental tension at the heart of the international order. Can we, as a global community, truly aspire to a system of justice that applies equally to all, regardless of nationality or political affiliation? The International Criminal Court, for all its flaws and limitations, represents that aspiration. It's a flawed experiment, yes, but an experiment nonetheless in holding individuals accountable for the most heinous crimes, in breaking the cycle of violence and impunity that has plagued humanity for far too long. The choice is ours. We can choose to support the ICC, to strengthen its mandate, to hold it accountable for its shortcomings, and to work towards a future where justice knows no borders. Or we can choose to turn our backs on this fragile institution, to retreat into a world of real politic and cynical self-interest where the powerful dictate the rules and the weak are left to suffer the consequences. The verdict is in. The question is, will we heed the call for a more just and equitable world, or will we condemn ourselves to repeat the mistakes of the past? The world, in many ways, is on trial, and the jury is still out.